What I'm about to tell you still leaves me questioning what is real and what's not. This happened to my dad and me, and even now, 2 years later, I get chills just thinking about it. I know how it sounds, and if I were you, I wouldn't believe it either. But I swear to you, every word is true. It was about 2 years ago. My dad and we took a trip to go camping out in the deep country. We enjoyed doing this, just the two of us. It was often a really nice time to get away from real life, you know? Just unplug, reconnect, all that stuff. This place in particular, it was a nice spot. Hiking trails, zip lines, a little touristy maybe, but it had deep history. Native American lands, that kind of vibe. We were always drawn to places with a sense of history, a feeling that something had happened there long before we arrived. The first night there, it was perfect. Families at other campsites, campfires everywhere, kids laughing, that classic peaceful night you go camping for. You know the feeling? The smell of wood smoke hanging in the cool evening air, the crackle of the fire, the distant murmur of other people enjoying the same simple pleasures. It's a soundscape of contentment, a feeling of being part of something bigger, something good. We cooked hot dogs over the fire, roasted marshmallows until they were golden brown and gooey inside, cracked open a few beers, and made small talk with the people around us. Just friendly nods and smiles, a quick, "How's it going?" as we walked past other sites. Typical, peaceful first night. Exactly what we were hoping for. But the second night, that's when things started to change. The morning of the second day, we woke up to a campground that felt different, quieter, almost too quiet. We went to the park's information center to ask about trails, maybe get a better map. That's when the staff told us we were the only ones left in the park. Nobody else had booked a site for the second night. At first, honestly, we were psyched. A whole campground to ourselves? It sounded peaceful, secluded, like we'd really have the place to ourselves. We joked about having a ghost town all to ourselves for the night. We didn't think anything of it, really. Just figured everyone else had packed up and gone home. End of the weekend crowd, maybe. We spent the day hiking, exploring some of the trails they recommended. We found a nice spot by the river and did a little fishing, though we didn't catch anything. Just enjoyed being out in nature, the sun on our faces, the sound of the water rushing over the rocks. We were taking it slow, just soaking it all in. At one point, while we were sitting by the river, we decided to listen to a scary podcast. Yeah, I know, maybe not the smartest choice given we were about to be alone in the woods at night. But we thought we were being funny, leaning into the spooky atmosphere. We put in our earbuds and listened to some story about Bigfoot sightings in the area. We laughed about it, made fun of the dramatic narration, didn't take it seriously at all, just messing around. By the time the sun started setting, we were feeling good. A little buzzed from the beers we'd had with lunch, tired in that satisfying way after a long day outdoors. That pleasant, bone-deep tiredness that comes from fresh air and physical activity. We decided to head back to the park's information center one more time. We needed to charge our phones. We'd been using them for maps and music all day, and the batteries were getting low. Plus, we wanted to grab some snacks, maybe some more marshmallows, before it got too dark. The walk back to our campsite from the information center, that's when the unease really set in. It was subtle at first, just a feeling. But the woods felt different on that walk back. The light was fading fast. The shadows were getting long and deep. The trees seemed to close in around us as we walked. The air was heavier, somehow, thicker. It felt like it was pressing down on us. And the sky had this weird tint, like twilight didn't want to leave. It wasn't quite dark, but it wasn't light either. Just this strange, muted color, like the world had been drained of its vibrancy. My dad, he turned to me as we were walking, and he said, "Doesn't this feel off to you? Like we're in some kind of dream?" And he was right. It did. That was exactly it. Like we'd stepped into a different reality, one that was just slightly wrong. The forest felt endless, stretching out in every direction, deeper and darker than it had any right to be. It felt like it went on forever. In every direction we looked, my chest got tight. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Not in the normal way you're not alone in the woods, animals, insects, the rustling of leaves. But like something else was there. Something watching us. Something we couldn't see. We didn't say much after that, just kept walking, faster now, our footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. Both of us glancing over our shoulders every few seconds, like we actually expected to see something lurking in the trees behind us. Some shadowy figure, some pair of glowing eyes. Ridiculous, I know, but that's how it felt. Back at camp, we tried to shake off the feeling. We stayed close to the fire, made it bigger, piled on more wood, watched the flames leap and dance. The fire was a comfort, a little island of light and warmth in the growing darkness. We didn't really talk about the weird feeling. We didn't need to. It was like we both silently agreed to just keep things normal, pretending nothing was wrong. Like if we ignored it, maybe it would go away. So, we roasted marshmallows again, forced ourselves to laugh and joke, put on some music on my phone, some upbeat classic rock, trying to fill the silence, to drown out whatever was making us feel so uneasy. Even smoked some weed again, thinking maybe that would help us relax, take the edge off. Not exactly the typical father-son moment you'd expect, maybe, but we were trying anything to get back to that peaceful feeling from the first night. But by the time the sun finally dipped completely below the trees, and the last bit of twilight faded, we could no longer pretend. We could no longer see what was in front of us, except for the flickering light of the fire. The woods around us had become a solid wall of blackness, and that's when the uneasy feeling had grown into something worse, something heavier, more real. As we sat by the campfire, roasting some s'mores, I want to say it was about 9 o'clock, maybe a little later, we heard a noise. It was a bang, just like that. A single, sharp, loud bang, as if a tree had fallen. It came out of nowhere, loud and close. It echoed through the woods, bouncing off the trees, seeming to come from the direction of the river. Maybe 100 yards away, maybe less. We both jumped. My heart started hammering in my chest. We grabbed our flashlights, those big mag lights we always brought camping, and pointed them toward the sound, into the darkness beyond the firelight. But there was nothing, just trees, shadows, the firelight dancing on the leaves. No movement, no glowing eyes reflecting back at us. Nothing, just darkness and silence. Bigfoot, I joked, my voice coming out a little shaky. A nervous laugh slipped out, but it didn't sound very convincing, even to me. Neither of us believed in Bigfoot, not really. But in that moment, in that darkness, with that sound echoing in our ears, it was the only thing that even remotely made sense. Or at least, the only thing we could name. A few minutes passed. Silence again. Just the crackling of the fire, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves in the light breeze. We started to relax a little, thinking maybe it was just a tree falling, like we first thought. Nature being nature. Then it came again. Another bang. Louder this time, and farther off. But the same sound, same weight, like something huge hitting the ground. We shined our lights again, sweeping them through the trees. But the forest just swallowed our flashlights. The beams seemed to disappear into the darkness, allowing us to see only the trees immediately surrounding our tent. Everything beyond that was just black, impenetrable. And then the third bang. Closer this time, much closer. That's when the fear really hit. Whatever it was moving toward us, like it was circling the campsite, getting closer with each sound. Then, not even before we were able to collect our thoughts, the fourth bang happened. About 20 yards away, maybe less. It was right there, just beyond the edge of the firelight. That's when the real fear and adrenaline set in. Whatever high I had going from the weed was now long gone, completely evaporated. My senses were sharp, hyper-alert. Every nerve ending was screaming. My dad turned to me, his eyes wide. I saw the fear in his face. Real, raw fear. And that scared me even more than the sounds themselves. My dad, he's not easily scared. He's always been the strong, calm one. To see him like that, it was terrifying. "We gotta get in the tent," he said, his voice low and urgent. I didn't argue, didn't hesitate. We both knew, instinctively, that staying out in the open by the fire was no longer an option. We scrambled to our feet, knocking over our chairs, kicking over the bag of marshmallows. We grabbed the last of the firewood, the logs we hadn't put on the fire yet, and threw them onto the flames, hoping the sudden burst of fire, the higher flames, would scare off whatever was out there. A desperate, almost childish hope. Then we scrambled into the tent, leaving everything else behind. The chairs, the snacks, the beers, even our flashlights. Just abandoned them all to the darkness. We just wanted to get inside, to have that thin layer of nylon between us and whatever was out there. As if that flimsy tent could actually protect us from anything real. I ran inside of the tent and quickly dropped to the ground, lying flat on my stomach, trying to make myself as small as possible, as if that would somehow make me invisible. My dad, moving a little slower, following right behind me. As he was about to get into the tent, as he was ducking down to zip up the door, that's when the loudest bang happened. So close. It felt like the ground shook, like something massive had just slammed into the earth right next to us. My dad froze, halfway inside the tent, staring out into the dark. His eyes were wide, fixed on something just beyond the tent flap. "Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper, grabbing his attention. "Dad, what is it?" He stared for another second, frozen, then quickly jumped into the tent, scrambling to zip up the door behind him. He turned to me, his face pale in the dim light filtering through the tent fabric. He muttered, his voice trembling, "It's standing there." "What? What's standing there?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. "I don't know," he said, his eyes darting around the tent as if he expected something to burst through the walls at any moment. It was like a wall of darkness. He sat there by the zipper, his back pressed against the tent wall, clutching the only weapon we had, a small pocket knife. Useless, really, against whatever was out there. But it was all we had. He held it in his hand like it was some kind of talisman, some magical charm that could ward off evil. I buried myself further under my sleeping bag, pulling it up over my head, trying to move as quietly as I could, hoping that if I was quiet enough, maybe whatever was out there wouldn't notice me. Ridiculous again, I know, but fear does strange things to your mind. Then came this vibration noise. A sound, but more than a sound. A feeling. It's still hard to explain to this day. It started low, like a hum. A deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground, through the air, through our very bones. But it wasn't just sound. It filled the air. It was a feeling inside of us, making our chest tight, making our teeth vibrate. I've never felt anything like it, before or since. It was like the woods themselves were vibrating, like the earth was humming with some dark, unseen energy. My dad whispered, his voice barely audible above the humming vibration. "You hear that?" I couldn't answer. I just nodded, my eyes wide with terror, too scared to make a sound. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was overwhelming now. It was no longer just a feeling. It was a certainty. Something was out there, and it was aware of us. This vibration, this humming, went on for maybe 5 minutes. It felt like an eternity. We sat in silence, frozen, barely breathing, listening to this unearthly sound, feeling it vibrate through us. And then, just when we thought it couldn't get any worse, this other sound started. It wasn't an animal, and it wasn't human. It was guttural, alien-like. That's the only way I can describe it. It honestly sounded like the Demogorgon from Stranger Things. That weird, clicking, rasping, inhuman sound. Nothing I have ever heard before, or since. We stayed frozen in that tent, too scared to breathe, too scared to move. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, drowning out almost everything else except for that alien noise. I had this small mesh window right by where I was laying, on the side of the tent closest to the woods, but I refused to look outside of it. I was terrified of being seen, of making eye contact with whatever was making those sounds. Just sat there, curled up in a ball, trying to control my breathing, trying to keep from screaming. My dad, he was still sitting there by the zipper, still clutching that little knife, a statue of fear in the dim tent light. And then, the weirdest thing happened. In the middle of all the chaos, all the terror, all the unearthly sounds and vibrations, we just blacked out. Just like that. One minute we were huddled in the tent, paralyzed with fear. The next minute, Nothing. Darkness. Silence. Like someone had just flipped a switch and turned off the world. Neither of us remembered trying to fall asleep. Neither of us remembered losing consciousness. It was just gone, like a skipped scene in a movie. When I woke up, it was still dark. My dad was still clutching the knife in his hand. He was lying on his side, facing the tent door. I woke up on my back, in a panic, my heart still racing, as if something was standing over me, even in my sleep. My first thought was to grab my phone, to check the time, to see how long we'd been out. But it was dead, completely dead. No power at all. I asked my dad to check his. Dead too. Both phones had been fully charged the night before. We'd made sure of it, specifically, making sure we had them working in case of an emergency. And now, both dead. Just like that. We had to pee. Badly. We'd been holding it in all night, terrified to leave the tent. We stepped outside, still shaky, still scared. We stood maybe 5 feet from the tent and peed back to back, still scared out of our minds, watching each other's backs, glancing nervously into the surrounding darkness. It was still pitch black outside. Pre-dawn darkness. The air was cold and still. The fire we'd stoked before diving into the tent, it was burned down to ash, like it had never been touched. The food we'd left out on the picnic table, untouched. Still sitting there, exactly as we'd left it. No animals had gotten into it. No raccoons, no squirrels, nothing. Just untouched. The whole place felt wrong. Like we shouldn't have been there. Like we'd stumbled into a place we weren't meant to be. A place that didn't want us there. We waited out the rest of the night in the tent, without saying much to each other. Just sitting there in silence, listening to the quiet darkness, trying to get some real sleep, but mostly just waiting for the sun to rise. As soon as there was even a hint of light in the sky, we started packing up, in silence, not saying a word, just moving quickly, efficiently, wanting to get out of there as fast as possible. We didn't even bother with breakfast, just threw everything in the car, jumped in, and drove. It wasn't until we were miles down the road, driving away from that place, that we finally talked about it, about what had happened that night. We realized we both felt the same thing. That feeling of being watched, hunted, like something was waiting for us to slip up, to make a wrong move. We told my mom when we got back home. She thought we were crazy, said maybe we'd gotten drugged somehow, or inhaled some weird gas from the ground. Some weird guest, she joked, trying to lighten the mood. But it wasn't that. It wasn't drugs, or gas, or imagination. It wasn't a joke. Whatever happened that night, it was real. We both experienced the same thing. The same sounds, the same feelings, the same terror. To this day, we don't know what it was. We didn't see it. Not fully. But my dad, he came closest. Whatever he saw, he said it wasn't human. And it wasn't natural. We never heard any similar story like ours. Never found any explanation that made sense. We haven't been back to that camping site since. Or even gone camping since, to be honest. I don't think we ever will. Some experiences, they just change you. They make you see the world and the darkness in it in a way you never did before. And sometimes, you just can't unsee what you've seen. You know?